So in the previous video, we got our application working. We got a very basic version working, and as you can see, we can, or what we did was we actually got the XML code dumping to the screen. Now, obviously, that's a good start, but that's not something that we'd want to show the end user of an application because it's not very useful at all. So let's see if we can now, the next few videos, get this application showing something a lot nicer on the screen in a format that would be more appealing to a user. So what we need to do is start thinking about how we can actually start manipulating the data that's in this XML file. But before we do that, we need to make a few little changes to the interface. So we'll go back to the code. We need to go back and open our layout file again, activity_main.xml. And once that comes up, we need to remove the text the text view that we've got on the screen, the one that initially had Hello World, as you can see there. We want to delete that. We want to actually add a button, and the button is going to be used to enable the user to click that. And when they click it, it's going to parse the XML. So in other words, it's going to go through the XML file that we downloaded and grab the components that we're going to talk about shortly and actually display them ultimately on the screen. So to do that, we need to firstly to remove the button. So I'm going to just select the button there in the design view or design mode. That's this one down here in the bottom of the screen. Obviously, you could do it in the text mode or the design mode, but it's just as easy to do it in the design mode. So I've just pressed the delete button and that's deleted. And what we now need to do is add a button so that we can click that to start an event. So I'm going to do that by just selecting this button over here and just dragging it over and just putting it in the corner there. Now what I'm going to do is just make this a little bit wider so we can see it a little bit better. We're going to change the ID first. So I'm going to scroll down until we find ID. Currently the name is button. We're going to call that BTN Parse. BTN is an abbreviation for button, and parse will mean that we're going to parse the XML, which is a term that we'll be talking more about shortly as we go through that process. Now, the other thing we want to actually include is a list view. So what we want is the list of the top 10 items to show on the screen, but we want the ability to be able to ultimately to scroll them. So if they take more than the screen, we can scroll them up or down. And to do that, we're going to need a list view for that. We're scrolling down under containers, there's list view. So I'm just going to select that. And again, I'm just clicking it, holding down the button, dragging it to where I want it to be. And it's going to be just under the new button, releasing the button, and it adds it automatically. Now you can see the concept of a list view there. If you can see very lightly, the grey behind the blue tells us that that's a scrollable area. And these are the items. So you've got the ability to add text within this sort of little window, scrollable window. So ultimately what we want to do, as I've said, click on the button. And then once the button's clicked, it's going to show items that are on this, the items of the top 10 apps are going to be shown on the screen. So we're going to change the ID to that as well. So I'm going to change the ID to, we're going to call it XML list view. And we don't really need to do anything else to that at this stage. We're going to be using that a little bit further on in the code when we actually start parsing. So we'll need to go back to the code and actually do that shortly. Now, the other thing that we want to do is we want to just check our layouts for the button. And sometimes there's two ways of doing it, obviously, but I like going back to the text mode sometimes and having a look because it can be quicker to actually see where you're at. And in this case, we've got the button all okay. You can see we've got the button name added. What we didn't change was the text. So I'm going to change that text there. I could have changed it just as easily in the design mode. Parse XML file. And of course, if we go back to design mode now, the button text gets changed correctly. So we've got these layouts just in terms of where the button's actually located. So that's good to go where that is now. What we want to do is we want to remove this parent left and we want to actually add a parent right as well. Now I'm going to show you how to do that in the design mode and then we'll come back and see what gets changed in here. Because there are situations sometimes where the changes you make can only be done in the text mode. So I wanted to show you the differences. So the area that we want to look at is layout align. So we want to click on, in this case, the actual layout. It's the list view itself. So I'm clicking on that and I'm going down to layout. So layout align parent. So I'm going to open that up. And you can see currently left is clicked and then equated to align parent left equals true. So if I actually remove that, like so, and instead if I actually change align parent bottom to true, so in other words, we want to align this text so that it actually starts on the bottom. And you can see when I've done that, you get these little green arrows. And that gives you a visual representation of where the line to it is. And again, if you click on the other buttons, you can actually see these little green arrows being added, telling you what's going to happen. So obviously we don't want this. We don't want the top, and we decided we didn't want left as well. So we want to actually align it to the bottom primarily, and you can see at the moment it's also aligned to the Parse XML file. So the other thing I want to do is I'm going to add it right. And notice now when I go back to the text view, or text mode, I've got align parent right equals true. Well, I'm going to actually change that. I'm going to put at id/btn parse. So I'm going to align it to the right of the actual button for button parse. So that's another way of doing it. And you can't do that in the design mode. So you have to actually type it in there. And once we do that and we go back, we've now got the lineups working correctly, but also you'll notice now right has actually got the actual ID in there instead of actually having a checkbox. It's actually got the text in there. So that's what I wanted to do there anyway. So that's good. So we've got that lined up, and we'll see that working shortly. So now that we've done that, now that we've deleted the Hello World text view, of course, that means that the code that we had in activity, our main activity, is now incorrect because we now haven't got a text view. So even though we're not seeing an error yet, if we actually compile this, we actually will get an error. So what we can do just to confirm that, we'll just build it. And we should find we get an error because, of course, that literally, this text view here will be okay because that's just adding the variable. But in terms of setting it up, trying to find it by ID, because we've removed it from the layout, it doesn't exist anymore. So I'm going to actually remove that completely because we don't need that text view anymore. And I'm going to remove that as well. And of course, we had it in one other place, scrolling down, which we actually used to set the text to be displayed on the screen. So we're going to remove that there. So that actually fixes those errors. So I'm just going to clear that screen down the bottom, like so. And now what we do want to do is we need to add 2 additional fields for this class. We want a button and also the list view. Of course, both of those we just added in our layout. So I'm going to type private button. We'll call it the same thing, button parse, and private. This will be a list view. In case it's important here, so make sure you're typing it the same way that you see I'm typing it. And list apps is the name there. And then in our code, which was talked about before, right here we're going to actually add them. Button parse. We're going to associate the field that we've added in this class with the layout button and list view. So it's going to be button parse equals button. Find view by ID, r.id. And it should be button parse, should be there. So it's found that in our layout file. And likewise for the list apps, equals, that's a list view. Find view by ID, r.id. And it's XML list view is what I called it. So that's the 2 associated. Now the other thing we need to do to our button is we want to set an on-click listener. Because what the process that's going to happen is we're going to download the data. So the file is going to be downloaded, the XML contents, as soon as the application runs. But we're going to have a button, and we're going to click that button, and it's only when that button is clicked are we going to actually start going through the process of parsing through the XML file and extracting out the fields that we actually want. So therefore, we need to set or add an on-click listener to our button so that we can actually have that code work when the button's actually clicked. So I'm just going to do a button parse. .set on click listener, and that's going to be a new view, and you can see that's coming up on the screen for on click listener. So we'll just press enter there. It should add all the code, and it takes a little second or so to get added. And I'm going to put to do add parse activation code. Now we can't do that at the moment because we haven't develop the code to actually go through and actually to extract the fields out of the XML file, and that's actually what we're going to be doing as we move forward. So let's go back now and have a look at the XML. You need to have an understanding of the structure and ultimately what you're trying to extract out of it. So if we go back to our browser again, now this is, if you recall from a few videos ago, was the XML file using the code Beautify XML Viewer. So this is the raw XML on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, it's somewhat better formatted. So I just want to go through and discuss some of these. And what we can do is, a good thing that you can do, if there's any areas that you're not interested in, you can just click on this little minus sign and it closes them off. So those areas there, for argument's sake, we're not going to be using. So obviously if we close that one off, that closes the whole thing off, so we can't use that one. So this information here, right up into entry, we're not going to be using any of that. So that's sort of just information that's in this file that we don't need to access and we don't actually want to extract any information out of. The bits that we're interested in is this thing that starts with entry. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to close them all off. And you're noticing already that there's one of these entries, and as it turns out, there's one of these for each of the top 10 apps. So there's 10 entries you can see on the screen there, and each of these is a separate section within the XML file for an app. So if we open just one out and have a look at it, you can see as we scroll down, these are all the fields that are within the entry. And you can see that the way that the Code Beautified website works is it shows us the entry, and then it sort of indents these other fields which are part of that particular entry. So it makes it quite easy for you to actually navigate. Can you imagine actually trying to go through the fields and looking through this code? This is obviously a lot easier and better to understand, and you can do this for any XML file. So looking through there, we can see there's various fields for each app. We've obviously got a link, we've got a title, a summary, a name. Scrolling down, we've got the content type, categories, an artist, etc., price even. Now, obviously, price would make a lot of sense because we've selected free apps, but it's there nevertheless. This is the information that's included in the file. So the actual fields that we're interested in for each of the top 10 apps that we're going to ultimately display on the screen is going to be the name. We're also going to grab the artist, and there's the artist there, and we're also going to grab the release date. And we could have chosen any fields, but the other three that we've chosen, there's the release date there. So we're just going to go ahead and actually grab those out. So all the other fields, even though they're there, we're not going to be actually using them. So again, it's pretty cool how this is actually set up using this website. You can sort of get a much better understanding of what we're trying to do. So in order to be able to process this file, what we need to do is we need to look for an entry, and we need to do this effectively 10 times. And for each entry, we then need to go through and extract out the name, the artist, and also the release date. So that's what we're going to be doing. So we're going back to our code. So what we need to do is we need some sort of container. In this case, it's going to be a class that we can actually create that's going to restore for each application the name, artist, and release date. So we're going to create a new class. So I'm going to go to my package, right-click it, select New Java Class. I'm going to call this application. This is going to be the top free apps, but I'm going to call it application. And this is a very simple class. It's going to comprise 3 fields, and we talked about those. Well, it's going to be a string for the name, a string for the artist, and a string for the release date. So we're not going to try and do any processing with the date. We're just going to treat it purely as a text. Whatever's in there, we're just going to dump to the screen. So they're the 3 key bits of information that we're going to be grabbing for each application that's in that XML file. So the other thing we need is the ability to be able to save a record and to grab the contents. So to do that, we can actually use the generate command. And I can click on getter and setter. Then what I can actually do is just actually select the 3 fields, press enter, and Android Studio automatically creates these getters and setters. So we can actually save the name, and we can also grab the name. So think of this application class is just like a container for us to store each application. So this is a single application that's coming from the XML file that we're going to store in this. So that's good that we've got that going. So the next thing we need to do is we need to start looking at a class, the class that's going to be responsible for parsing the raw XML. So in other words, the class that's going to look at the contents of the XML file and start figuring out how to extract the information out. And to do that, we're going to be using the concept of XML parsing. So a lot of the base concepts are actually built into Android to extract this information. So we need to write a little bit of a code to sort of give Android a bit of a hand and a bit of a heads up on exactly how you want to process it. But in terms of the low-level processing, in other words, going back to our example here, how to actually go through this code and make sense of it, Android provide all that functionality. All we really have to do is sort of say, these are the fields we're interested in. And we also need to actually, in this case, point out that this entry, we need to actually look for that. We need to tell Android this is a major category for each app, and so it knows where to start. So what we're going to do is we're going to just start creating this class, like an Android Studio, and then we'll come back in the next video and continue on it. So I'm going to create a new class as I've done before. I'm going to call this one Parse Applications. Its role is to actually go through and actually parse the file and extract all the applications out of it. So we're going to need a few things. First, we're going to need a variable, a field to store the data. So I'm going to just call that data. So this is the actual XML that we're going to be processing, and that will actually be the file contents that we downloaded, that we used the download data class for. So we're going to be passing that data to this class so that we can start processing it. The other thing we need is a container for all the applications, because if you recall back here in the application class, that is just a single application. So we want to actually store multiple applications because there's 10 that we need to actually store for this particular XML file. So this is just one. So what we really need back in here is we need an array to store multiple application objects effectively. So those entries that are coming out of the XML file. So we use an array list for that. So I'm going to type array list, and I'm going to type this and then we'll explain what it is. So application, we'll call it applications. So what that command is actually just doing is saying we're going to be using a type that's built into Java called array list, which think of that as an array so it can store multiple entries of a particular type. Then the less than sign and then the word application and then the greater than sign, what that actually means is we're saying that all the entries that are going to be recorded or stored in this array are going to be of type application. So in other words, application coming back here is to this class. So we're creating an array, a space to put multiple applications, and each entry in that array is effectively going to have these three entries, a name and an artist and a release date. So that's what we're actually doing there. And then the name is actually applications. So next, let's just do a couple more things before we finish off this video so it doesn't get too long. So what we need to do now is we need to generate a constructor. Then we'll just add a getter for our applications, because the final list of applications that are created from this class we're going to need to access elsewhere so that we can display them on the screen. So I'm going to go back to my generate again. So again, you can get back to generate by going into the code and selecting generate. Look there, and that's the shortcut for Mac, but that will show you what the shortcut is for your operating system. So I'm going to do generate constructor, and the only parameter I want to be passed to this is going to be the data. So I'm just going to click on that. I'm not going to click the other one. And we're associating the data, and we'll call this the XML data. And XML, I guess to be precise, what I should have done is actually call that XML as well. So what I'm going to do is just show you another way of doing this. You can actually, if you decide you want to change the name of a field, that all you need to do is right-click it, select it, right-click it, click on refactor and rename. And notice as I start typing, see how it's also changing it down in the constructor? I press enter to accept the changes, and it's actually done. That's a great way, particularly if you've used it in sort of 4 or 5 different places, to quickly actually change something. And you also know then, the good thing about that is it's definitely going to be changed everywhere. Okay, so that's that. And lastly, we need to create just a getter. So I'm going to do that. And that's going to be for our applications, so we can actually return that when they're finished. Then just before I end the video, the other thing we've done is we've created a variable for our applications, but what we need to do is initialize it. So we need to create a new instance of it so that we can actually start using it. Otherwise, the first time we access it, we'll actually get an error. So to do that, we just type applications equals new array list, and as I start typing, IntelliJ will automatically say, is this what you mean? So I'm just going to press enter there, and I can do that. So I can either leave the less than and the greater than there by not putting in the word applications like I did up here. What that's saying is you're just going to initialize what it already knows it's been assigned as up there. So if you wanted to, you could also come back here and actually paste that into there just to be precise and say it's really clear that what you want it to be there. So either way is fine and will actually work well. All right, so at this point, this video is getting a little bit long, so I'm going to stop here, and then in the next video we'll come back and we'll start writing the process method, which we're going to be using, which is the actual code that starts going through and reading through that XML file. So I'll see you in that next video.